What's up, everybody? In this video we're going to talk about how to turn a song into a guitar arrangement, and I'm going to use my cover of Redbone as an example. Now, this isn't going to be a tutorial on how to play my Redbone cover. I actually already made that video. If you're interested in learning how I did that on my YouTube channel publicly, there's a Redbone tutorial. What I'm going to talk about in this video is the process of turning that song Redbone, Childish Gambino's version, into my guitar cover. Sort of the steps I took and how you might do this for a song that you want to turn into a guitar arrangement. So the first thing that we need to do is figure out how to play the song. I'm a big fan of transposing songs into new keys to play them on the guitar. I did that with pretty much all the covers I've ever done. I play it in a new key on the guitar, and to do that, it really helps to figure out what the key that the original song is in. And we can kind of do that by analyzing the chord progression and the melody and seeing what they come from. Anytime that something is in a key, that means that there's a major scale that key uses. They're not exactly synonymous, major scale and key, but every single key only uses notes from a specific scale. And there's only 7 notes in a major scale. So anytime something's in a key, that means that everything that happens in that song, all the chords, all the melody notes, those all come from a set of only 7 notes that are a major scale. So the sort of first step is figure out the chord progression and the melody, and then try to sort of reverse engineer what key we're in by looking at the notes that are in the chord progression and the melody. So there's a couple ways, depending on your skill level, that we can figure out how to play the chord progression of a song. The first one is to listen to it and learn it by ear. If you put the song, I'm a huge fan of going to YouTube, playing the song that we're looking to cover, taking the playback speed to like 25 or 50%, and then just plucking out notes until we find notes that sound like they're the same ones that the song is using. And I can do that for both. I tend to do that for both the chords and the melody. It really helps to adjust the playback speed on YouTube. If you haven't used that trick, you should definitely try it. I'm sort of constantly learning things by ear doing that. It's a lot harder to learn something by ear at speed, especially if there's fast things going on. But anyways, that's sort of method number 1, learn it by ear. Method number 2 is if it's a song that you're trying to cover that's as popular as Redbone, it's going to be really easy to find out what the chords and the melody are if you just search on the internet for it. If you Googled Redbone tab or Redbone chords, you'll probably find pretty easily exactly what you're looking for. I can't quite remember which I did, if I learned it by ear or if I looked up the chords, but the song Redbone uses, at least the verse, uses a 3-chord progression that goes like this: B major, C sharp major, D minor. So there is our chord progression. Now our melody sounds like this. Right? So that's the chord progression and the melody for the song Redbone. Now, what we want to do is sort of reverse engineer what key this song is in based on looking at the chord progression and the melody. Now, to do this, we got to think about the major scale. So the cool thing about the major scale is that it never changes. The pattern is always exactly the same. And so if we have a bunch of these, you could consider the chord progression and the melody clues that are trying to tell us what scale we're coming from. And if we know that the major scale is always exactly the same, and it follows the pattern whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. And I remember that as 2 and 1, 3 and 1. 2 whole steps and a half step, 3 whole steps and a half step. And what that means is starting from our root note, which is going to be whatever key we're in, from that note we go whole step, half step, 2 whole steps and 1 half step, and then we go 3 whole steps and 1 half step. Whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. We've learned the chord progression and the melody either by listening to them by ear or by looking up tabs and chords online. Now, we need to figure out what key or what major scale those chords and melody come from. We're going to look at the melody first, and I want to tell you this little shortcut, this little cheat sheet sort of workaround that I always go to when I'm trying to figure out what key something is in. And this is that there are only 2 spots in the whole major scale where there are half steps. It's between the 3rd step of the scale and the 4th step, and then the 7th or last step of the scale and the 8th or 1st. So between 3 and 4 and between 7 and 8, or 7 and 1, Those are the two areas where there's half steps. So in the beginning of the Redbone melody, there we go. We've got, starting from the note here, we go down a whole step, and then here we go. There's a half step. So this has to be either the third step of the scale and the fourth step, or the last step and the first step. So we've already narrowed it down to two keys. There's only one scale where this is going to be the third step and fourth step, and there's only one scale where this is going to be the last step and the first step. So let's talk about what those two scales would be. We know the formula of the major scale, right? Whole, whole, half. So before our half step comes two whole steps. So if this is our third step of the scale, we just go down a whole step, down another whole step, and this would be the first step of the scale, or the key that we're in. This would be C sharp. So that's our first sort of potential candidate for what key we're in. This might be in the key of C sharp major. Now, what's the other key that we're looking at? This, if it's not the third step of the scale, would have to be the seventh step of the scale, and which would mean this would be the first step. So this is an F sharp. So right now we've narrowed it down to two keys. We're either in the key of C sharp major or F sharp major. Now, there's a couple ways that you could sort of confirm which way, which scale we were using. One of them is to play along with the song and noodle around in those two scales and see which one really fits. But remember, we also have a couple more puzzle pieces, or clues I should say, that we haven't looked at yet. So we also have the chord progression. That's another clue. That's going to contain other clues that tell us which scale or which key we're in. So the thing about chord progressions and key is that every single chord in a key is going to start, the root note of that chord is going to be one of the steps of that scale. So if we're in the key of C sharp major, every single chord in the key of C sharp major is going to be a step of the C sharp major scale. Now, like I said, there's only two spots in every single key where there are half steps. It's going to be between the third and fourth step of the scale and the seventh and first step of the scale. So what that means is there's a half step before the first step of the scale. So if our key is C sharp, that means that there has to be a C in this scale. We have to have the note C sharp, before C sharp is going to come C. That's one of the two spots in the scale where there are half steps. Now, right off the bat, we have a B chord in this progression, right? Our chord progression goes B, C sharp, D sharp minor. That's a pretty strong hint that this is not in the key of C sharp major, because if this were in the key of C sharp major, we wouldn't have the note B. We'd have C. So what was our other key? F sharp, right? There's a pretty good chance that this song is in the key of F sharp because we know that there's only two scales it could be based off of the little first half step that we encountered in the melody. And then we sort of ruled out C sharp because there's no C in this chord progression. There's a B, and there's no B in the key of C sharp or the C sharp major scale. So, pretty good chance we're in the key of F sharp major. So let's recap that whole process. We looked at the chord progression and we looked at the melody. Based on the melody, we found a half step, and we narrowed it down to two scales that it could be because there's only two spots in every single scale where there's half steps. And then we ruled out one of those scales based off of the chord progression. So you should really think of this as sort of like a puzzle or like a mystery, and we're just looking for clues that are going to tell us what key we're in. So we figured out that we're in the key of F sharp major. There's one other thing I want to throw your way, and actually this is, if there's one thing you get out of this video, this would be a really good sort of gold nugget takeaway, and that is we could have figured out what key we were in based off of another pattern. Now this pattern has to do with the fact that there are only 3 major chords in every single key. Every single key only has 3 major chords: the 1 chord, the 4 chord, and the 5 chord. And the 1 chord doesn't have any other major chords next to it. It's on one side it's got a minor chord, and on the other side it's got a minor chord, but the 4 and 5 chord, we've got 2 major chords that are a whole step apart. That only happens once in every single key. So if you ever find an instance where there's a chord progression where there are two major chords a whole step apart, B and C sharp, for example, pretty solid chance that that's the 4th chord and the 5th chord in whatever key we're talking about. And like I said earlier, every single chord in every single key starts on a note from that scale. So if B is the 4th chord and C sharp is the 5th chord, then that means B is the 4th step of the major scale that goes with the key that we're in, and C sharp is the 5th step. We know the pattern, right? Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Before our 4th step comes a half step, and before that comes 2 whole steps. There's down a whole step, there's down another whole step. There we go, we found F sharp. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can narrow down what key you're in. You can look at the melody notes and the chord progressions and try to reverse engineer it. Or, this is a much quicker way, is just remember that there's this pattern. The 4th chord and the 5th chord, that's the only time that you have 2 major chords that are right next to each other. Moreover, this chord progression, or this song I should say, uses an extremely common chord progression that's called the 4-5-6. We just go from the 4 chord to the 5 chord to the 6 chord. So now that you know that that's a really common chord progression, you can, anytime you see a major chord, then we go up a whole step, to another major chord, then we go up a whole step to a minor chord, pretty solid chance that's the 4th step of the scale, 5th step of the scale, and 6th step of the scale. And you can either go up or down. If it's the 6th step of the scale, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 there's going to be one more whole step before our last half step that gets us to our octave. So there we go. There's a bunch of different ways that we can sort of find out what key we're in. What I like to do when I take a piece of music and cover it is change it into a key that's maybe a little bit more friendly for guitar, or that I like to play in more. Now, the key of F sharp major is not exactly a great key for guitar. So what I did was I took this to the key of C. This is a great key for guitar players. Now, if we're in the key of C, we need to find out what the 4th chord, the 5th chord, and the 6th chord are in order to play this song, right? So, starting from C, we're going to go first step, we go whole, whole, half. There's our 4th chord, that's going to be F. Up a whole step is G, there's our 5th chord. Up another whole step, there's A, our 6th chord, and that one's going to be minor. So, in the key of C, our 4-5-6 chord progression is F, G, A minor. Now, shouldn't be too much of a surprise. I took the chord progression, moved it into a new key, and then played them in 1-5-3 spread triads, like this. I think it's a great chord voicing for looping or for guitar arrangements because it follows this less is more philosophy, right? We don't have a whole big bar chord that's kind of a wall of sound. What we have is the same 3 notes that are in the bar chord, but only one instance of each. We don't have anything doubled up or tripled up. And what this does is it creates room for other things. It creates space for other parts of this guitar arrangement. Because what we really don't want to do is create too much sound. Things get muddy if there's too much overlap. And so using a really boiled down chord voicing like a 1-5-3 spread triad can be really helpful and is generally just a good idea anytime that you're creating a guitar arrangement of something. So the next step is going to be figuring out where the melody is now that we've changed our key. So let's go back to the key of F sharp major, where our chord progression was B, C sharp, D sharp minor. Now, our melody went like this. So there's a couple ways that we could sort of relate this to either the key that we're in, the scale, or even the chord progression that we're in order for us to move it or transpose it to another key. So there's the first way is sort of figuring out what steps of the scale the melody use. So we figured out, because of this half step and the presence of the note B in the scale rather than C, that this has to be our root, F sharp, which means that this is the first step of the scale. And our melody goes, so that's the 3rd step of the scale, to the 2nd step, to the 1st step, to the 7th step, and then this little move goes, that's the 5th step of the scale, the 3rd step again, so when we're down here, we're an octave below where we started, and then here's the 6th step of the scale. So that first little phrase goes, 3rd step, 2nd step, 1st step, 7th step, 5th step, 3rd step, 6th step. And then the little turnaround is 5th, 6th, 1st, 5th, third, 7, 1, 2, 1. So that's sort of the first way that we could relate that to the key that we're in, so that when we go to the new key and the new scale, we can just play the steps of the scale and we'll have the same melody. Now there's another way that I like to do this sometimes, and it's related to the chords that we were playing. So inside our D sharp minor chord is the first step of that melody. That's the fifth of the D sharp minor chord. So that's our starting point. Now, D sharp minor is the sixth chord of the key of F sharp major. When we go to the key of C, A minor is the sixth chord. So we can look for the exact same note. The fifth of the D sharp minor chord was our starting spot for our melody. So the fifth of the A minor chord is going to be the starting spot for our melody, right here. And then remember, we're just in the key of C. And so we remember the formula of the major scale goes whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now what you want to do is pluck out the exact same melody based on the steps of the scale. So we know what the scale is now. We know what the first melody was in terms of steps of the F sharp major scale. Now we just play the exact same thing in terms of steps of the C major scale. There we go. We now have a guitar arrangement, and actually, in my cover of Redbone, the only sort of fancy thing I did was I played the melody in octaves, and I played it here. But it's basically the exact same thing, right? We just played the same melody, but we found it in the new key, and then I doubled it up into octaves and I put it over spread triads. There you go. That was basically the whole process of turning the Childish Gambino studio recording of Redbone into my guitar cover. Was figure out what key it's in based off looking at the clues that the melody and the chord progression give us, and then move it to a new key and try to find the exact same chords and the exact same melody. And then really the only like arranging that I did was turning the whole chords into spread triads so that there's more room, there's sort of less crowdedness, and then I turned the melody into octaves, and there it was. That's sort of how I came up with the Redbone cover. Okay, I hope this was really useful for you. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. I always want to hear from you guys. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.